Hello and welcome to this special edition of Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Our big focus this hour is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's meeting with Xi Jinping in Tianjin. It lasted for 55 minutes. That's right, PM Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping have concluded their meeting on the sidelines of the SCO Summit in Tianjin. The talks ended on a friendly note, with both sides stressing on the need to further ties between the nations based on mutual trust, respect and sensitivity. In his opening remarks during delegation-level talks, PM Modi emphasized on the need for friendship between two of the most important civilizations and populous countries in the world. There was also conversation on how the dragon and the elephant must come together. That was a point made by President Xi Jinping. Marking the 75th anniversary of India-China diplomatic relations, Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke about the significance of working together in a multipolar world and the need for India and China to work for the betterment of international relations as well. During the near 55-minute bilateral conversation between PM Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping, PM Modi asserted that the relations between the two nations were thawing and assured that there was peace and stability at the border. Listen in.
Excellency, हमारे गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत के लिए मैं आपका हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ। पिछले वर्ष कयान में हमारी बहुत ही सार्थक चर्चा हुई थी। हमारे संबंधों को एक सकारात्मक दिशा मिली। सीमा पर डिसएंगेजमेंट के बाद शांति और स्थिरता का माहौल बना हुआ है। हमारे स्पेशल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स के बीच बॉर्डर मैनेजमेंट के संबंध में सहमति बनी। कैलाश मानसरोवर यात्रा फिर से शुरू की। दोनों देशों के बीच डायरेक्ट फ्लाइट भी फिर से शुरू की जा रही है। हमारे सहयोग से दोनों देशों के 2.8 बिलियन लोगों के हित जुड़े हुए हैं। इससे पूरी मानवता के कल्याण का मार्ग भी प्रशस्त होगा। परस्पर विश्वास, सम्मान और संवेदनशीलता के आधार पर हम अपने संबंधों को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, चीन द्वारा SCO की सफल अध्यक्षता के लिए मैं आपको बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं। एक बार फिर चीन यात्रा के निमंत्रण के लिए और आज की हमारी बैठक के लिए आपका हार्दिक धन्यवाद।
Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping said that India and China must work together to uphold multilateralism. He also said that both nations must work together to ensure peace and prosperity around the world. Listen in.
The world today is swept by once-in-a-century transformations. The international situation is both fluid and chaotic. China and India are two ancient civilizations in the East. We're the world's two most populous countries, and we are also important members of the global South. We both shoulder the historical responsibility of improving the well-being of our two peoples, promoting the solidarity and rejuvenation of developing countries, and promoting the progress of human society. It is the right choice for both of us to be friends who have good neighborly and amicable ties, partners who enable each other's success, and to have the dragon and the elephant dance together. This year marks the 75th anniversary of China-India diplomatic ties. Both sides need to approach and handle our relationship from a strategic height and long-term perspective, so as to realize the sustained, sound and steady development of our bilateral ties. we must also step up to our historic responsibility to uphold multilateralism, work together to bring about a multipolar world and more democracy in international relations, and to make our true contributions to peace and prosperity in Asia and around the world.
All right, joining us on the program are Pramit Chaudhuri, Practice Head for South Asia at the Eurasia Group. Let me go across to Pramit now. Pramit, thank you very much for joining us. We are getting a sense that the meeting has generated positive momentum. In the run-up to this meeting, the sense that we got was that it's not going to be earth-shattering or headline-making, but will lead to incremental steps and incremental improvement in the overall relationship. What do you think will be the trajectory going forward after hearing both President Xi and PM Narendra Modi?
I expect the trajectory to be positive, but the question is really, does it actually begin a genuine transformation of the Sino-Indian relationship, which, as you know, is has been extremely hostile or has had many problems, to the point that India still sees and continues to see China as its primary strategic competitor and rival. So what we're seeing here is a summit that's working, I would argue, on three levels. One is a process of normalization between China and India that goes back to the Galwan Valley border clash in 2020. And we've seen over the past 2 years, China in particular leading an attempt to end the fallout, if you wish, of that. And we will probably see the announcement of border airplane flights resumed between the two countries as part of that normalization process. The second level is a consequence of both countries' concerns about the increasingly unilateral and at times whimsical actions of the Trump administration. And I think the references to both supporting the multilateral system and global stability are basically in a reference to that. However, it is still the fact that India still sees America as a country that as its primary economic and strategic partner, and China is simply not on that same level. But the third level, and that's where we have to see where this trajectory goes and is potentially changing, history making, is that at the border negotiations between the Indian NSA and Wang Yi, they had mentioned, the Chinese had said that we are prepared to consider border demarcation, a process that had ended in 2005 because China had refused to go forward with it. But if China is genuine about that, that would indicate that they want to settle in many ways, one of the key reasons for the continuing problems between China and India. How far that will go, and whether China therefore will also become a lot more, constructive in a lot of the other elements of their economic relationship, that has yet to be seen.
Right. Pramit, an important point that Xi Jinping made was that it is the right choice for both countries to be friends, have good and amicable ties. We should be partners who enable each other's success and to have the dragon and elephant come together. Ahead of this meeting, the Chinese ambassador to India had extended an olive branch by saying that China firmly stands with India against the bullying of the United States. How do you read the message that Xi Jinping is delivering to Prime Minister Modi?
So he sees an opportunity that India and the United States had seen an increasingly close strategic relationship over the past 15, 20 years, possibly even further back, really going back to the George W. Bush administration. And much of that closeness was driven by a common strategic concern about China. And increasingly, that relationship had become not just strategic, it had become economic. You saw the movement of Apple developing alternative supply chains for its iPhones in India, largely at the detriment of China, and so on and so forth. So I think you see with Trump coming in, and he doesn't seem to share or really concern himself about these larger geopolitical concerns, And as you know, for him, whether or not you're an ally or an adversary, it doesn't really matter. He'll hit you with tariffs. And for him, it's all about a certain degree of this America First policy. China sees an opportunity. At the very least, we can potentially we can at least slow down the relationship between India and the US so that over the next 2 or 3 years, nothing very much happens. And potentially drive a wedge between India and the US, which would then help, which would cripple America's original Indo-Pacific strategy, which is in many ways designed to contain Chinese power and influence. And I think for Xi, that's worth it. The question is, does he also see an opportunity to actually change in the long term the rivalry between India and the hostility between India and China? That is not clear. And that will be what we'll have to see over the next 2 to 3 years.
Right. Whether China sees an opportunity to change the course of India-US relations for good. Let me now go across to Mr. Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor of Chinese Studies at JNU, who is joining us right now. Professor Kondapalli, thank you so much for joining us right now. Both sides discussed early resumption of flights. Visas have already started. Kailash Mansarovar Yatra has resumed. Border trade has resumed. How do you see some of these confidence-building measures which have taken off? They were discussed in this meeting, this 55-minute-long meeting as well.
I think these are preliminary measures to improve the bilateral relations. As you know, that on June 19, 2020, Dr. Jaishankar mentioned about the ban on apps. 218 apps and the Confucius Institutes being shut down and investment restrictions. So this is following the Galwan incident 2 days before the announcement. And now they are resuming some of these. But the core issue still is on the border. We have seen Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit recently on 17th and 18th August. And we have seen the core commander level meetings to be extended for the middle sector and the eastern sector. An expert group and a working group has been formed for this purpose. But what is important is that both sides have not removed their troops or equipment from the border areas, which indicates that there is something holding back. China has not initiated the steps towards de-escalation and de-induction. And so this remains still a major problem in the bilateral relations. China may suggest that border issues should be ignored right now, but we have seen ignoring the border issue resulted in a lot of tensions, including the Galwan incident and before the other incidents that have happened. So I think India is holding on for this multilateral meeting. And we should see more progress on the border in order for the bilateral relations to improve.
Right. That is an important point. Let me also get in Victor Gao, who is joining us from China at this point. Victor Gao, there has been a positive meeting between the two leaders. But how do we go ahead and trust this outreach by China unless the border issue is not resolved? And then you have the issue of terrorism. And China and Pakistan being strong friends and ironclad allies.
Thank you very much for having me. What happened for the summit meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and His Excellency Prime Minister Modi of India this morning is a very good, very important step. I think it will manage to reset China-Indian relations and pave the way for more constructive engagement between China and India. Now, it is very dangerous to think that China-India relations are only one-dimensional. No, there is a territorial dispute, of course, which need to be resolved. But the territorial dispute is not the totality of China-Indian relations. You talked about China-Pakistani friendship, etc. Yes, indeed. But I think if we look at sub-Indian continent as a whole, how to achieve lasting peace between India and Pakistan on the one hand, and between China and India on the other hand, will be the most important thing. And I think if we are seized up by these territorial disputes of any kind without enjoying lasting peace between and among these major countries, then it is a dangerous recipe for either China or India or Pakistan. So I think we need to adopt a very macro perspective. And I think Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping said the right thing to restore peace and trust and mutual respect. From the Chinese perspective, there is no lack of respect for India as a country or the Indian nation as a people, for example. We want to do the right thing, to put the territorial dispute behind us. And allow me to emphasize, the territorial dispute is not created by China or India. It is created by the British Indian colonists. Neither China nor India should be held hostage by these very poisonous historical legacy left over by the British, which now still keeps China and India apart. I think we need to have all the courage and vision and wisdom to do the right thing, to put the territorial disputes behind us so that we can move on to solve all the other problems. For example, achieving more balance in our bilateral trade and also achieving lasting peace between China and India, between India and Pakistan, etc. And this will be really in the fundamental interest of all the people of our three countries.
Right. Pramit, let me get you in at this point. There was no discussion there on Press Note 3 or lifting ban on Chinese companies. But in the run-up to this meeting, India and China leaders have been discussing this at multiple levels. Do you think India can have an approach whereby the boundary issue has not been resolved fully, but at the same time, we start lifting ban on Chinese companies like TikTok, make relaxations on Press Note 3? Because the boundary issue is key for us. You know, that has caused a major conflict between India and China in 2020.
So first, I'll disagree with you. One point, there is no link between the boundary dispute and India's economic restrictions on China. Press Note 3 was released before the Galwan Valley crash, and it was driven not because of the border, but because of Indian concerns about the People's Bank of China making a bid for 1% of HDFC Bank, India's largest private bank. There were other similar investments by China in what India would consider strategic sectors, especially in the digital and technology side. And India had begun to impose those restrictions even before the border clash happened. They accelerated after that, but understand that I would say that even if we had not had the Galwan Valley border dispute clash, those restrictions on Chinese investment and Chinese presence in the Indian economy would have still continued. China in return, however, has imposed its own economic restrictions. And three of them were mentioned in the run-up to the present meeting. Tunneling equipment, which is used among other things in the border, but also for bullet train making in India. Fertilizers, diammonium phosphate restrictions were placed on India, though those are also global. And then, of course, permanent magnets, again, a global ban, but licenses began to be issued to Japan and Korea before they began to be at least considered for Indian companies. But there are other restrictions that China has put, and the biggest one, I would argue, now these three are now going to be Wang Yi had indicated that in his trip to India that those three would be lifted, but there are continuing Chinese attempts to undermine the movement of companies like Apple, Foxconn, even a company like Tata Electronics from working with Chinese technicians, Chinese companies that make components, Chinese technology, some of which is not even Chinese, some of that is actually owned by Apple, and so on. Those restrictions, as far as India can see, are designed to undermine the shift of supply chains from China to India. Those have not been discussed. China has not lifted them. In fact, in July itself, we saw 200 Chinese technicians being called for, who were working for Foxconn, being forced back by the Chinese government. So we have to see whether those are being seen by the Indian side, not just about as a consequence of the border or Press Note 3, but a deliberate Chinese attempt to ensure that India's economy doesn't grow or rise beyond a certain point, especially in certain sectors. The question now is for these two sides: does the politics, the border negotiations, these summit meetings allow the two to come to an understanding in which restrictions on both sides are at least mitigated? I don't think they will ever be completely lifted, especially on the Indian side, because those really are a consequence of a much longer term relationship of trust that simply it doesn't exist and would take a long, long time to come. But at least going back to where the economic relationship lay at roughly early 2020 would be something that I think both sides would be looking for.
All right, that's an important point. Taking back the relationship to where it existed in 2020, before the Galwan clashes happened and before April, as Pramit very rightly said, when India brought out Press Note 3 to prevent hostile takeovers from land border countries, opportunistic takeovers from land border countries. We're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to discuss the outcomes of the Modi-Xi meeting in Tianjin. Welcome back to the special edition of Global Eye. You tuned in to CNBC TV 18. Meanwhile, after that high-stakes meeting between the two leaders on the sidelines of the SCO Summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping expressed that the SCO should unite the global south in building an equitable system of governance while outlining measures for safeguarding post the World War II international order. He added that development was key and the ultimate form of security. The president also added that the Belt and Road Initiative served as a key platform for SCO practical cooperation. China's trade with SCO members stands at a record $890 billion, which is 14.4% of total foreign trade as well. Now, we all have with us still Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, Chair, Professor at Soochow University, Pramit Chaudhuri, Head of South Asia at Eurasia Group, and Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor of Chinese Studies at JNU. Professor, let me begin by asking you about Xi Jinping's message for SCO leaders. And this has come via the Chinese state media. Xi Jinping and his vision is that there should be alignment between SCO and the BRI. And do you feel that this is something that would be acceptable to India as well? Because China would want the Belt and Road Initiative, the SCO countries to be more closely aligned, more closer economic partnership. Will India agree to that? Because, you know, we've had speakers through the day who've said that the SCO is a major trade grouping, and at a time when India's US relationship, trade relationship with US is faltering, we can concentrate with SCO to boost our trade.
You're raising a very... Are you asking me or the other panelists?
This is for Professor Kondapalli.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I think Prime Minister Modi mentioned in the Qingdao meeting of the SCO previously that India has reservations on the Belt and Road Initiative, and specifically in relation to the sovereignty and territorial integrity issues of India not considered in the Belt and Road Initiative project. He had mentioned earlier that there was the CPEC projects in violation of the instrument of accession that the Jammu and Kashmir Maharaja had signed with the Indian Union in 1947. So this is illegal and expansionist in design. So India will not accept the Belt and Road Initiative as long as CPEC projects are considered. India has, of course, no objection and is the second largest contributor for the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, where the projects are of economic value rather than passing through sovereignty-related disputes. So on the issue of whether India will support China on the BRI, there is a definite no. All the successive governments in India have opposed the CPEC projects because it violates the Indian sovereignty. And since China is also concerned about sovereignty issues, India is reminding China that it cannot adopt double standards in violating sovereignty issues of other countries.
That's an important point. Let me go back to Victor Gao. Victor Gao, for India, the issue of terrorism is extremely important. In fact, we'll wait and see the kind of statement that the SCO makes on the issue of terrorism. Now, while China is reaching out to India with an olive branch, we also have to factor in historical tensions. There were tensions during the Doklam crisis. There were tensions during Galwan. China and Pakistan have a historic relationship. And we also saw support for Pakistan from China during the recent conflict, during Operation Sindoor as well, from the 6th to the 9th of May. Now, how does India give up all of that to rethink the partnership with China? What has really changed in the last 3 months, apart from what Trump has been doing through tariffs, that would make us believe that we should accept this outreach by China and work towards closer economic integration?
Thank you. You are raising another very important question. I think, allow me to emphasize one point. SCO probably is the best regional cooperation framework which can deal with terrorist attacks, because SCO was started with the intent to fight against terrorism of all kinds in this particular part of the world. Now, 25 years have elapsed, and I think we still need to commit ourselves to fight against terrorism of all kinds. And that involves terrorism inside India or in Kashmir or in Pakistan or in China or anywhere involving any members of the SCO. So I think while India is complaining about terrorist attacks resulting in losses of life of the innocent people in India, I would say let's use SCO as the major framework to deal with these issues and really get to the bottom of that, to make sure that all members of the SCO should be united with one aim, that is to fight against terrorism and take out all the root causes which give rise to terrorism. That's one thing. Now, the second thing is that you talked about China and India and the United States. What President Trump has done to India is complete disrespect for India as a country and the nation of the people in India. Now, all the threats and the intimidation and the blackmail and the ultimatum they issued against India show that they do not respect India as an independent sovereign nation. And they kind of dismiss India. Now, if you look at anything and everything that China has been doing with India, ever since the People's Republic of China was founded back in 1949, China has never displayed any disrespect to India as a country, to the Indian nation as a people, for example, or the Indian civilization. What we are uncomfortable with is the territorial disputes, which still remain unresolved. And China will never accept the McMahon line being taken as the border between China and India. And that gives all the reason between China and India to do the right thing, to engage with each other, to solve the territorial disputes in eternity, in perpetuity, for mutual benefit. That means if you compare China versus the United States, no, China does not have a separate agenda against India. China wants to engage with India for the benefit of both China and India. Now, allow me to make another very good point. India wants to restructure the United Nations and become a permanent member state of the Security Council of the United Nations. Allow me to mention one thing.
Okay.
That gives more reason for
Mr.
India
Gao?
to friend China rather than estrange itself away from China.
All right. Mr. Gao, I've completely run out of time, but I'd like to thank our guests, Professor Kondapalli and Pramit Chaudhuri and Victor Gao, for also joining us. We've completely run out of time. But indeed, this is an important meeting which will set a new agenda for ties. How much can the two sides trust each other going forward? That's something that remains to be seen. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.